HR employees, what was the most ridiculous, hilarious complaint you ever received? Not HR, but I got to witness, quote, the saga of the boots recently as a part-time peon. Background is the company I work for has delivery drivers, and since they will be visiting construction sites, it provides work boots for them. In-store employees have to provide their own footwear within the dress code. We had hired a female driver and ordered the smallest size of boots our supplier had available, and they did not fit her. One of our part-time drivers encouraged our in-store assistant manager to try the boots on for herself and see if they fit, which they did. The part-time driver then encouraged her to take them. So the assistant manager took the boots. The manager noticed this and told her that he didn't really care about the boots since they were just going to sit unused anyway, that she should not wear them to work because the employees under her did not have footwear provided by the company. Her defense was that one of the part-time drivers told her it was okay, but the manager thought he had gotten through to her eventually. The next time he saw her wearing them at work, she explained that she had cute boots for at-home use and that these would be perfect for work use. He reiterated that it was unacceptable for her to be wearing them at work, so she mailed his boss looking for backup. The boss's boss almost immediately called her and explained to her that he could actually fire her for what she had done. He used a specific analogy to explain why it wasn't okay and shared the analogy with the store manager at a regularly scheduled meeting they have the next week. The store manager then reiterated that specific analogy to the assistant manager the next time the topic of the boots came up. Yes, it was still a point of contention. She took this consistent messaging from two levels of management as a sign that she was being ganged up on and tried to go over the district manager's head, going to both regional management and HR about it. This ended in an official write-up that she thought was just so unfair. Never mind her ignoring instructions from not just her boss, but her boss's boss too. She has since left the company. I'm not sure who is more clueless, the assistant manager who thought she could defy two levels of management, or the part-time driver who encouraged her to steal the boots. Story 2. So here's a story of my HR. I'm not HR, but I was actually a spectator of the whole story and later almost got pulled into it. We were having lunch and there was this dude from finance that was a very well-liked dude. Let's call him Joe. And there was also this girl that worked in engineering and was your typical gossip girl with a vegan twist. Let's call her Jane. So Jane was already at the table with her GFs talking about the latest vegan trend and trying to evangelize some unknowing victim, working student, about how vegan was the way to go. Joe comes in with a big sausage and some French fries all drenched in ketchup and mayonnaise. He sits down, unwraps his crap, and just grins in my direction. So I'm like, dude, you sure you can handle that much meat on your own? Joe, lol, yeah, stick to your meat and let me munch mine. Friendly banter ensues and Jane starts ranting in our general direction about how the poor animals have suffered so that we would satiate our appetites and whatever shenanigans she started preaching. Again, Joe, totally composed, just tells me, hey, totally chill dude, did you know that scientists discovered that tree roots can spawn for quite the distance and use them to communicate with other trees and plants and mushrooms, thus making them living, sentient beings? At this point, I'm looking at the dude and just said that, well, makes sense and stuff. So Joe takes the unknowingly thrown hint and tells Jane, if you are so self-conscious about nature and how living beings are terminated because of our appetites, how can you be eating that salad? I can almost hear those poor tomatoes scream in horror every time you take one of their brothers out of the bowl and start chewing him. So Jane at this point goes red and starts on a tirade about how he could be such a schmuck and lie about things that he had no clue until Joe pulls his phone and starts Googling the World Wide Web of trees or some crap. Of course, HR was sitting at the table and watching the whole drama. Accusations start flying about how cows and pigs and about everything mammal, eatable or not, end up on Joe's plate, and Joe keeps pointing at the phone. Okay, people were freaking laughing at the ridiculous situation and HR was already done and out of the table. The situation went back and forth until a banana flies and hits Joe smack in the face. Joe, it's not very nice of you, Jane. Poor banana is hurt now. Okay, I gotta admit the thing sounds silly and far-fetched, but I kid you not, this really happened. Jane stands and says to everyone, I'm reporting you to HR for provocation, lies about trees, and for not respecting my food. Joe, but the poor banana is crying after you threw it. Jane goes to HR and files a complaint. Crap escalates to management until the director of the facility calls both Jane, Joe, me, and some other selected people for clarification. I won't write more than saying the dude was trying his utmost to sound serious about the whole thing and everyone got off with a stern talking to. The HR, though, forbid everyone of pushing agendas about food habits and scientific discussion involving plants as long as Jane was there. Story 3. One of the managers I worked for got reported to HR for a girl's constant dress code violations. She had lime green hair, came to work in a black button-up that came from a Hot Topic, and black jeans. She had piercings on her nose, mouth, and 6+ on her ears. The manager was chill about it, though. His rule was as long as you do your work, you're fine. She didn't do her work well, though. She was always online gossiping about something and bragging about something. If she would send an email to the whole company, which happened often, she would shout in the office, "Please don't read it." The final nail in the coffin for her dress code violation was when she tattooed the word "screw" CIS on her hands. The manager told her it wasn't appropriate and she reported him to HR. The actual HR complaint about the manager paints him as a prejudice, a criminal, a Christian, and possibly a Trump follower. We have no politics at the office since it just leads to drama. The HR personnel took out her big list of violations that she had been accused of in that week. The biggest one was mistreatment. The complaint to HR was serious, but since they were serious charges without evidence other than him asking her to please do her job, it went nowhere and they were ridiculous. Ever since then, HR would receive a few complaints from her a day, such as, "He is playing Trump speech in the office. He is reading out hate speech. He is trying to convert our non-Christians into Christianity. He is creating a hostile work environment for women. He is mansplaining things to other female coworkers. He mistreated insert coworker name here." HR is so sick of her crap at this point that any citation against her will probably lead to her termination. We don't know how she maintains a job here because it was revealed that she has no idea what she is doing when works, and most of the time after finishing work, we spend most of our time fixing hers. Story 4. I recently had HR tell me that one of my staff had been undersupplied in his annual leave over the past few years and he needed to take at least 10 days off over the next 6 months to correct the leave liability. Paid at a higher rate than usual to make up for the error, of course. He could take a 2-week block or say a day off a week until he's used the leave, his choice. He was so enraged over being given extra paid holidays that he wrote to our general manager to complain, screamed at me, his boss, "I know my rights," refused the leave or even to discuss why he wouldn't take it. Anyway, I wrote his performance review this week, and there are multiple goals about his professional, respectful behavior that need to be reached in order for him to get a raise this year. Yeah, not so much. Oh, and he still has to take 10 days off. Story 5. My HR department once fell for a phishing email and sent everyone's W-2s to a random hacker. HR then informed everyone via a mass email with no read receipts at 9 p.m. on a Friday, even though multiple people were on vacation and had left instructions to be called in an emergency. When I got back from my trip a week later and expressed my concern about her not actually notifying me about this, she totally brushed it off. I said, "Do you realize that I need to freeze my credit and I'm 7 days late in doing so?" She said, "No, don't freeze your credit. You won't be able to use your credit cards if you do." Another time during a workers' comp claim, I needed to speak to our claims adjuster and she said, "An adjuster doesn't get assigned until after the claim is settled." That's the exact opposite of how that works. She was my stupid complaint. I'm starting to think their HR department is actually a comedy troupe in disguise. Story 6. Was once asked to investigate a mistreatment situation where 3 different women were coming on to a male coworker throughout their shift. I took down the details, got the names, easy peasy investigation, so I thought. A week later, nobody by these descriptions or names had ever worked for the company. I decided to talk to the gentleman again. After a lengthy conversation where things didn't quite stack up, I asked him how these women communicated with him. I kid you not, with a straight face, he looks me in the eye and replies, telepathically, like I'm some kind of idiot. I'd never sent an employee for psychological evaluation up to that point, and I hope to never have to again. So yeah, I was asked by a delusional schizophrenic to conduct a mistreatment investigation on the voices in his head. Story 7. I was a manager and had to call our HR in on this one. We had a computer that was used by multiple people and a couple of girls complained that it had a virus and videos were always popping up when they turned it on in the morning. I decided to have a look to see if someone was messing around on the closing shift, so I looked at the security footage and lo and behold, one of the supervisors was watching videos. When we called him in, he didn't deny it but said technically he didn't pull his thing out. The HR guy just looked at him and didn't say a word until after what seemed like forever. The guy said, "So I guess I'm fired," and then walked out. Story 8. I told my coworker as professionally as I could that it wasn't appropriate for her to be using her phone while at work teaching kids, supposedly. She spent all her time on Facebook. Little kids would be screaming and wailing on each other literally 10 feet away, and she was totally oblivious. She complained by email to HR that I was rude and confrontational. They pulled me aside and told me to be more careful about how I spoke to coworkers. I told them my side of the story and they spoke to her again. She got a written warning. They didn't tell me what happened, but I gathered from office gossip that she lost her crap and started shouting at the HR staff. Rude and confrontational, perhaps? Anyway, she's on her final warning now, and she has a habit of hitting on the married dads of her kids involving children in adult matters. Why hasn't your mummy paid your fees yet? Don't you want to come to daycare? And generally being an unprofessional, self-absorbed pain, so I can't wait until she gets fired. Story 9. Not HR, but my company is too small to have one, so it just falls on me. Used to have an AR clerk who would snack at her desk all day long. We are pretty casual, laid-back company, so it's not a big deal as long as she was getting her work done. But then it escalated to having food constantly being delivered, tacos in the morning, pizza at lunch, Chinese in the afternoon. It was bizarre and made it difficult for her to work when she's eating full meals all day. I was on the fence about saying something until she brought in an Instant Pot. She plugged it in and cooked a frickin' pork roast at her desk, poured in barbecue sauce she brought and ate it all day. I was dumbfounded. It was so strange. I pulled her aside the next day and told her how unprofessional it was. She was shocked and told me I was being unfair because I never specifically said no one was allowed to bring in an Instant Pot. She truly seemed genuinely surprised that she wasn't allowed to do that. She scaled it down after that, but I sometimes wonder how much farther she would have gone if I never said anything. Story 10. I'm not an HR, but someone called HR on me. I work with a few people that aren't that fluent in English. One of my coworkers was trying to explain to me what kind of tacos he ate and could not remember the word for stingrays. So he took my notebook and drew a picture of a stingray and wrote the word turtle. So it seemed like this: crudely drawn stingray plus the word turtle. A lady I work with went through my notebook, saw the picture of the stingray plus the word turtle. She called HR because she thought I was writing notes about her in my notebook. She said that the horribly drawn stingray plus the word turtle meant that I wanted to hurt her because she is slow like a turtle. Definitely a reach. I didn't get in trouble. I was just told by my boss that I'm not allowed to talk about turtles anymore in case it upsets her. I rarely talk about turtles, so this isn't really a problem for me. He was not eating stingray or turtle tacos at work. He was telling me that was his favorite type of tacos to eat when he was at home. He is originally from Mexico and is in Iowa on a TN visa. Maybe in his coastal Mexican town it is normal to eat stingrays and turtles. I have no idea, really. All I know is I couldn't help him in the slightest way when he asked me if I knew where to get stingray meat. I'm more intrigued by the idea of stingray tacos than the HR drama, to be honest. Tell me more. Story 11. Not HR, but I talk to people, so I know a few stories. Here's my favorite in terms of how ridiculous it is. The HR director found a water bowl in the woman's bathroom. It wasn't hidden or anything. It was just there in plain sight on the floor. Turns out one employee is smoking and she brought it in her first day of work. She then demanded to be allowed to smoke in the bathroom, but they came to the agreement that she can take a break every day to go out and smoke in the nearby place if she wants to. Little background, I work in IT in Ukraine. IT specialists here make good money, and they are also spoiled as hell due to high demand. Some people complain about all sorts of stupid crap all the time, like free lunches are served in containers they don't like, or the elevator needs an AC, etc. Story 12. I was once summoned to HR. When I got there, one of my employees was already sitting in the head HR lady's office with a "what the heck, really?" look on his face. The HR lady goes into a diatribe about how this employee is a pig that doesn't respect women and thinks he is better than all women. On and on about just how awful this guy is. Employee was my lead software dev and was awesome at his job and a great guy otherwise. Turns out, HR lady had asked him to write a spreadsheet full of formulas to calculate open enrollment dollar values for withholding based on all the available options and individual pay rates. He told her that, "I can help, but I've got this payment gateway project that's due and I don't really have a ton of time. Can I just show you how to get started instead?" And that's how the argument started. My response was, "Okay, employee, you can leave, thank you." Then I told her that if Excel did not open, that's IT. Custom sheets with formulas and pay data for employees, that's HR, and that I could recommend some resources for learning Excel. That witch was constantly trying to get IT to do her job for her. Story 13. From my wife, as she has worked HR for 17 years. She is more on the legal side of HR for a huge national grocery chain. Employees get written up for disappearing during shifts. Manager and supervisors call him multiple times. Employee returns 30 minutes later like nothing happened. Did not have a valid excuse like "I was outside with a customer" or whatever. They look too. He files a union grievance and complaint. Union schedules an arbitration hearing at their offices, so wife has to make an hour drive to represent the company. The store manager needs to be on hand as he issued the write-up. Normally, it would just be a, "Fine, don't do it again and we will come into the union." But wife found out the property manager just had perimeter cameras installed. Wife shows up to the meeting. Clerk brings his mom even though he is 18 to 19. Dude says he never hears calls for him to come to front. She explains that there are loudspeakers in the back dock area. He says he wasn't there. She lets him keep talking. Then she opens her laptop and plays a video. Is that you? Dude goes white as on the screen he is seen with a local street worker. Turns out the guy's GF worked a different department at the same store and was there that same day. He ends up quitting and GF breaks up with him. Story 14. Once had to tell a guy a court order means the company cannot ignore it regardless of how much he shouted at me or threatened me. I did genuinely look into it because it was the first I ever heard of anyone having money ordered by a court to be diverted. So our payroll team sent over the court order and session dates it all took place in. I asked our solicitors to look it up and see what went down since it was all a matter of public record. Ends up our employee never bothered going to the court to contest the order and just ignored it. So, armed with this knowledge, I brought him in and laid it all out. Initially, he listened and just sat and waited for me to finish. Then after I'm done and explain nothing further can be done nor can we amend the payments, he explodes at me, personally blaming me for all his problems and that he can't afford these payments. Finally, after listening to him shout at me for like 10 minutes and blaming me for his problems, I dropped my professional demeanor and flat out told him that if he bothered to defend himself in court as much as he fruitlessly was trying to do here, maybe he wouldn't be in this position. At that point, he threatened me but shouted it loud enough that HR outside the meeting room had heard it. My HR manager came in and just told him to leave and was fired for gross misconduct, at which point he tried to swing at my HR manager, who was an amateur boxer. He knocked the guy out, put him in the recovery position, and called 999 for an ambulance and police to attend our work. It was the most eventful HR meeting I ever had. Story 15. Was handed a handwritten letter from my boss as he said, "I think you might need this." The letter had been written by an employee who let herself into the boss's office and left it on his desk while he was out, complaining she was unhappy about how the staff were mistreated and disrespected because he often left during the day to go shopping and get haircuts. This rarely happened, probably not even once a month, and that she thought it was appalling that he left for a week over Christmas to see his family while they weren't allowed more than 3 days off over Christmas. Had a meeting with her and literally had explained that he is the owner of the company and can come and go as he pleases, that he works evenings and weekends when others don't, and that the week off was the first time he had taken holiday in 8 months, unlike the rest of the staff who got 28 days throughout the year. She looked at me, expressionless, and said, "And? I want a week off at Christmas. If he gets it, I should have it." I told her her complaint had been logged and we'll look into it. She walked out, relayed a different version of our conversation to a dozen employees, and gossiped about the boss. She was gone within a month of the letter. Story 16. There was this balloon incident. The quality control manager in the customer relations department decided to come in early and put a balloon at the desk of every service rep who was taking above average call volume. Within 5 minutes of the start of the shift, one of our worst performing reps had complained that this was unfair. This is a union shop, so she filed the grievance that some reps got an unfair bonus in the form of a balloon. The union contract is clear that all reps have to be treated exactly equally. The rep that handles 110 calls per 480-minute shift, and the rep who handles the absolute minimum number of calls and refers half of them to a supervisor are equal. The rep who filed the grievance got 30 minutes union business assigned that day, and that means that her call stats for that day did not count. She got a free day so she could handle less than the minimum, and she could claim that she had been on the phone for that 30 minutes, then she would have made her target. To solve the grievance, the manager had to give a balloon to everyone. This is the kind of thing that makes people hate unions. And if you're enjoying the video though, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 17. Obligatory night in HR, just a witness. I worked for an outsourced call center, so all we had for resources was what was provided by the client. A customer called in and had some documentation that conflicted with our info. The agent called the supervisor over and was explaining the situation, showing her where the discrepancy was in our training materials. He was sitting the whole time, she was standing. He got referred to HR because he was, quote, aggressively wielding the 3-ring binder at her. I was in a raised seat a few rows over, so I was asked for my account. AR assured me it's completely confidential. They then interviewed another soup and began their convo with, what Junior says happened was complete mischaracterization of my statement, so that was fun. There was also the time after my cat had passed. She was 22 and I'd had her the whole time, so I was not in a normal frame of mind. And I hugged a fellow female coworker I'd hung out with outside of work, and I asked her how her kitty was. She reported me for mistreatment. I was pretty shocked. I was asked to meet with HR. So I explained my mental state and that I'd been to her house and seen her cat and so was asking after him. Once I said that, that was basically the case closed. Story 18. Not an HR employee here, but I've heard some stuff from various sources. Complaint 1. This was against a teacher in, let's say, not a very well-rated school. The person in question was extremely laid back, like, this is the guy who gave me and a few others a lift back from a party. And when two of the others were about to hurt each other in the middle of the street, his response to, should we do something, was, maybe, but I just say we wait a bit, nothing will probably happen. The complaint was that he'd picked up and thrown a table at a student, then hurt another student in the face. It was found to be false. Didn't stop the little smucks trying to complain against more staff, including one of the, let's say, less academic students, claiming a teacher threw him through a window, only for his claim to fall apart when asked to show the broken window. Complaint 2, told to me from someone who works in a factory as HR. My Spanish coworker stole my boots and threw them into the crusher, which sounds funny enough, except the Spanish coworker was called in to answer to the complaint, and his defense was that he wouldn't thrown the guy's boots into the crusher because here were his boots, while the Spanish guy was standing there in just his socks. Story 19. I got a visit from HR. This was about 21 years ago. An email was going around the company that showed animated cartoon characters. Several were embedded in the email text. I saw the email on my reporting's computer as I walked by, and I ordered it deleted and not sent to anyone. It was too late by then, as I had gone out to a lot of people. HR got a complaint, and the company lawyer visited every person who received or saw the email to see if anyone was so offended that they needed mental health counseling. When she came to me, I just replied that I have the internet at home and I am immune to being offended. I was also called by HR in order to retain all emails from a woman who works in HR. Seems that she had been caught in the act with another HR employee. She claimed that it wasn't what it looked like. Her male coworker was just under her desk looking for a pen that he had dropped. And another time I got called for HR for something that HR should have known better not to do. The head of HR told me that he needed to file a report showing our compliance with interviewing minority candidates. But the database was missing the race on a lot of people because when they applied, they couldn't fill that out. So he had me open the raw data tables and go through it, filling out the races of job applicants based on their names. So anyone named Washington or who had a black-sounding first name like Shaniqua was just updated to black. Story 20. We didn't have HR at the shop I worked at. Small companies generally don't here, plus it's retail, so nobody cares about workers' rights. But I was a union rep for my store, which is similar. I had a complaint from one of my colleagues who had requested a transfer to another store, and our manager laughed at her and refused her request when she told him why. Her reason behind wanting a transfer? I want to get a transfer to the countryside to get away from all the Syrians who are coming over on the boat. When I asked her, what boat? She replied, the Syrian boat with all the immigrants on. It was in the Sun. Horrible tabloid paper. Didn't you see it? She was in her 20s and not the brightest crayon in the box. I said I'd follow her complaint, but knew it wouldn't go anywhere. She's still in the same store 4 years later, and that boat still hasn't arrived. Funny that. Story 21. Complaint on me when I was an HR generalist. I work in an industry where we can have a real problem with certain groups coming in and making trouble. Cough, animal rights groups, cough. And I was doing all of the hiring for the location at the time. I had one lady come in for a tour of the facility as part of the pre-hiring screen. She was late, which automatically disqualified her from going, and I brought her into the office to inform her that I would be resending her tour offer. Cue a sob story about getting off of the bus from New York. I asked why she was coming all the way down here, and she said she was looking for a job after graduating college. I said, oh, congratulations, what was your degree? And she said, criminal justice. These are all textbook red flags for hiring in my industry. So I documented everything, firmly told her I'm afraid that you were late, so you are unable to proceed with the hiring process at the time. She tries to argue with me, but I stay firm, escort her out. A few minutes later, she calls the HR number and gets me on the phone. She doesn't recognize my voice until I tell her the same, well, you were late. So she demands to be transferred up the line so she can complain about me. I sent her to my boss, who had his door open listening to the entire conversation about her sob story, all the red flags, etc. I get an email that was sent all the way up to VP saying what a good job I did handling a potential red flag. Story 22. I made the complaint. HR tried their best. It was one of my first weekend shifts at my full-time job, library work. It was my supervisor and I opening, and others would join us once we opened. I have an allergy to cats and a particular ingredient in perfumes. All employees were told that I asked that they check their bottles and let me know if they were wearing this ingredient so I could take the appropriate meds. I didn't want to stop people wearing it. This isn't a particularly bad allergy, but enough that I can't smell for the rest of the day and my eyes swell. It becomes bad for me to stay at work. This supervisor was late to the shift, didn't help me open, and didn't tell me if she was wearing the perfume ingredient. I was stressed and almost had an allergic reaction, but caught it in time. Told HR and my boss. HR was not happy. My boss covered for her. Happened again the next week. HR was not happy. My boss covered it again. I worked there for 12 months before my contract ended and I decided not to renew. Story 23. I'm posting on behalf of my wife as she doesn't have a Reddit account. She works in a call center type HR environment, so they typically take a lot of phone calls with payroll type questions. One day she gets a call from a guy asking to split payments, but the amount has to be consistent so that the same amount goes into one account and the rest go into the other. This was not possible because said employee was commission paid, IDKY. Cut to the guy saying he's trying to leave his girlfriend and she can't know of a recent pay increase and that he's worried about getting terminated if his current girlfriend finds out he was making more money. What? My wife suggested he call the police. She has also told several stories about who are very open about their dissatisfaction with not being paid because they need to buy stuff. Story 24. I was the person complained about and, well, 2 decades later, I'm still salty about it. I got called into the HR manager's office one day and was told that I was being written up for discussing, quote, inappropriate things in the office. I'd never done that, ever. I was still a very much closeted boy at the time, so there wasn't a chance in hell I was going to talk about my intimate life to the middle-aged women I worked with. Who complained about me? I asked, being young and naive. We can't tell you that. There's confidentiality rules, the HR said. Okay, I understand. What was it that I supposedly said? We can't tell you that either. You may use that to discover who lodged the complaint. So I'm being written up because an anonymous person complained that I was saying inappropriate things in the office, but you won't tell me who complained or what I supposedly said? That's right. Now please sign this form to indicate that you understand the severity of your infraction. No, I won't do that. You have to. It was a stalemate for almost 20 minutes while I refused to sign their form. They threatened to fire me, but I still refused to sign. In the end, she made some comment on the form about my, quote, unwillingness to participate in the process. Then, to top it off, the rest of the office wondered why I completely stopped speaking to all of them altogether. I refused to engage in any of the usual non-office related talk. If it was not 100% required conversation in order to do my job, I flat out ignored my coworkers' presence. Again, I was called into HR and reprimanded for my abrasive demeanor. I quit that job shortly thereafter. Story 25. Not in HR, but I had a situation where I could report a guy to HR for hurting me, but I didn't because I didn't want to have to explain why. This guy was a huge mooch. He would take food from others' teams as food days. He would take food from people's hands. He once took a piece of freeze-dried fruit from a package a guy was holding without saying a word, just dipped his hand in the bag and grabbed one. This would be like taking a chip from a single-serving bag that someone was eating and not intending to share. He would come over with a bowl anytime I made a bag of popcorn, wanting some, and once came over wanting a cookie from the small box I bought, and I told him he could have one, and he took 3. So back to the story. I had brought some fries back to work from lunch, and he came bounding over like a lost, hungry puppy wanting some. I told him no, I wasn't done with them. He goes back to his cube, all dejected. At the end of the day, after he went home, I put the thing of fries in his cube. The next morning I came in and he said, thanks for sticking up my cube with fries, and punched my arm. It wasn't hard and I really wanted to get rid of the guy. However, I didn't want to have to explain that story to HR as to why he punched me and why I left the fries in his cube. Story 26. Not HR, but I was one of a group complained about to HR. Former employer had a large parking lot and one guy who was very full of himself got a new car and took it to a parking away from everyone else. No problem with that, but then he'd brag loudly to everyone about how expensive his new BMW was. It wasn't. And how he had to park it away from the lesser cars everyone else drove. So a group of us started making a point of parking next to him, still within the lines, just next to him. So he'd go out at break and move his car somewhere else in the lot, and we'd go out and move our cars to wherever he parked. After a week or so of this, he apparently made a big stink of it to HR and wanted them to write us all up for parking next to his car. HR politely told him they weren't going down the path of designating his car as one nobody could park next to, but the HR lady did ask us to please stop as he was a headache for her to deal with. Story 27. I'm a store manager and I have an employee that has been an issue for months. Corporate is being beyond cautious about terminating her. On a Monday evening, she was given a written warning. She was off Tuesday. Her next shift was to open the store Wednesday morning, my only day off that week. Store opens at 10 a.m. Around 11:30, I wake up to 6 missed calls, voicemails, and texts from my district manager. Why isn't the store open? Neither of us can get in touch with this person, and I race in and open the store. She eventually called me, and I was obviously angry and told her not to bother coming in. I'd worked the shift. She went over my head and called the DM who told her to come in, basically so she could be given her final warning. I was livid that she was acting like it was not a big deal at all. The frickin' store wasn't open for 2.5 hours. That's a fine of $750 from the mall. Plus, she was literally just given a warning the shift before. She said, I don't know why you're crucifying me. I was only a little late. And I lost it. I yelled at her that she was just given a warning and she can't continue to mess up. She complained to corporate that I was rude to her. Corporate told her I had every right to be angry and therefore rude. She's being fired next week. Story 28. My manager came to me as an HR guy to talk about potential disciplinary matters for an employee that missed work for repeated disappearances on sick leave without explanation or doctor's note. She comes into the office when she returns and hands out DVDs to everyone in the office about her recent appearance on a reality TV show about wedding planners, as they get the families of both sides of the aisle to unite. The manager got hold of one of the DVDs, and lo and behold, she was clearly visible on television. Based on timing, it felt very suspicious since it coincided with her disappearances. Manager was furious. He wanted to go as far as hiring a private investigator to check the timestamps. Felt he didn't want to go on a fishing expedition and confronting the employee and asking veiled questions about time off she didn't provide. We had to counsel him that he should ask for a doctor's note instead. Story 29. Not an HR rep, but I work in the produce department with this lazy POS. He will complain to HR about anything and everything. We had a new team lead start and he's trying to get everyone to work a little harder, make a name for himself and whatnot. So one day, lazy POS is filling apples but doesn't go through them or rotate them. Team lead comes up and asks if he rotated and POS says yes. Team lead asks, then why are there cold apples on top of warm ones? Newer apples obviously came from the cooler. Lazy POS literally drops the box in his hand and rushes upstairs to HR. He cries to HR at least once every other week. It's always about stupid stuff, so they never really tell him what he wants to hear. They just spend time listening to his problem and say they will talk to the people responsible. They never follow up because no one is doing anything HR-worthy besides him wasting company time. He was once on the sales floor digging for gold in his ear and a customer wrote a complaint to the corporate. He tried to go to HR about our manager for showing him the complaint and saying that his ear itched and what was he supposed to do. They told him obviously to go to the bathroom, itch, and then wash your hands. You're working with food, for God's sake. Not HR related, but this guy and I share the same name. He is the equivalent to a Walmart greeter because of how little work he gets done and how much talking he does. My managers have tried to address this, but it's almost impossible to get fired where we work. He will get customer compliments every week. Some of them are literally word for word every week. The thing is, the ones that aren't the same wording are usually mine. We work in the same department, but I do different things than him. For every compliment we receive, we're supposed to get a $5 food coupon we can use in the store. I haven't received one of those in at least 4 or 5 years because he always says they are his. If I try to argue, he will literally look at the customer's name on the compliment form and say, "Oh, me and Andy have been friends for years. I know this one's for me." Story 30. I was called into HR a few years back. I was working at a machine and am known for having experience and knowledge of the factory. A female supervisor was trying to answer a question from one of the new people in the section. At some point, she waved to me and tried to get my attention. Since I was in the middle of a setup, I wasn't paying attention to her. As I finished and pulled my hands away, I heard her call loudly to me, "Hey, old guy." I think thought she was being funny as she was probably 20 or 25 years younger than I am. I looked up from my machine, looked right at her and asked, "Are you referring to me?" Her, "Yeah, where is blah 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 located? This guy needs whatever it is he needs." Me, "It's down aisle 6, top shelf, fat." Once in HR and with a union rep sitting quietly in the corner, I didn't say anything as I was being counseled for being rude and disrespectful toward the new supervisor. The HR read the complaint to me and was surprised I acted that way because I had no other black marks on my record in the 6 years at the company. The complaint neglected to say she referred to me as old guy. When asked why I said what I did, I said, I thought it was a new policy. She called me an old guy and I'm old, so I called her fat because, well, she is fat. HR then called in the supervisor and the young lad she had with her at the time. She admitted she called me old guy, but said calling her fat was way worse and out of line. HR dismissed the complaint and the new kid and I were told to go back to work. We found the new supervisor was fired, the union rep demanded it, and HR agreed. Story 31. Some 25 plus years ago, I started a new job with a large corporation on the graveyard shift. Following our first night, we were to report to HR before leaving to view training and company policy videos. About 8 to 9 of us guys were placed in a large windowless conference room where a TV had been set up. The HR woman started the video and dimmed the lights and left the room. I think several of us, not being accustomed to working nights, were fighting to stay awake throughout the orientation video. We had just worked all night and had to spend an hour in a mostly dark room. When the video had ended, the HR lady re-entered the room and returned the lighting to normal. Once the lighting had been restored, she could see one of the guys had fallen asleep with his head laying on the table. She slams her stack of folders and paperwork down onto the table, startling the fellow awake and says in a most vicious tone, "You better not be my name," which he replied, "No, I'm his name." And nothing further was said. I was young and I just kind of shrunk back in my seat. I didn't want to point to myself out by saying anything and bring further attention onto myself. I really didn't want to get fired on my first day. LOL. I continued to work there for a few years and never had any other issues. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about or why my name was associated with potential problems. I've never had a complaint about my work or behavior, nor have I ever been fired. Older me would have confronted her about the situation, demanding to know what the problem was, but young me just wanted to avoid a situation. However, I am still puzzled by it. And if you're still liking these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.